detailed answer. I will try and help her get as detailed an answer as is available.
Let's go to Ben Bradley. Ben.
Mr. Speaker, we have important local elections coming up, which inevitably leads to more residents seeking information and clarity about council services and about who is best value for their vote. In Nottinghamshire, we have contrasting fortunes. The Conservative-run County Council has been able to support local people through the pandemic, whilst protecting services and balancing the books, whilst Labour-run Nottingham City has just about bankrupted itself, and residents will pick up the pieces. The money they've blown on Robin Hood Energy alone could have built leisure centres in Mansfield or regenerated our high street. Could my right honourable friend make time to debate these failings at the Labour City Council, to aid our understanding of how they've managed to make quite such a mess of it, openly assess the impact on taxpayers, and to ensure this kind of wasteful incompetence can't happen again?
Leader.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes an exceptionally good point. Every week, Business Questions throws up another example of appalling mismanagement by socialist councils. It is vital that members of this House hold their local authorities to account. They have a special and valuable platform here, which they must use for their constituents' benefit. It is remarkable how many members happen to complain about the harebrained energy schemes from socialist local authorities of both the red and yellow variety. Perhaps the people suffering under the red yoke in Nottingham might look enviously to the greener grass in the Conservative County Council and use their vote accordingly on the 6th of May.
Let's go to Dr. Lisa Cameron. Lisa.
Many thanks once again, Mr. Speaker. The All-Party Parliamentary Group for Disability that I chair is committed to ensuring that MPs support opportunity in employment for all. As a vital step, in early June, we are undertaking an online disability confident workshop supported by the Disability Minister and Department for Work and Pensions that we hope will sign up at least 100 MPs' offices as accredited disability confident employers. So will the Leader of the House support this work alongside further progress and debate on disability inclusion in Parliament?
Leader.
Mr. Speaker, it would be an honour to do so, and I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for raising this. I do a podcast on why Parliament works and did an interview with my noble friend Lord Hague, who introduced the Disability Act in 1995, which has been so important in improving disability rights and employment opportunities for the disabled. And anything I can do through the Office of Leader of the House to further the work that he started, I'd be privileged to do.
Jacob Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Eston swimming baths have been closed since the start of the pandemic and will sadly remain closed for at least another year because of the state of disrepair, estimated at almost £3 million. I've said from the start that I'm committed to a swimming pool in TS6 for the people of TS6, and I'm working with the council on a plan to bring a brand new pool there so that everyone in South Bank, Normanby, Teesville, Grangetown and Eston have a pool that they can use for decades to come. Does the Leader agree with me on the importance of community swimming pools, and will he make time for a debate in the next session?
Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I do congratulate my honourable friend on the work he's been doing to save the Eston Baths, and I know that he's raised this matter with ministers. He is an absolutely brilliant champion for his constituents in Redcar and ensuring that they're kept in the swim, so to speak. This is important work, and the government has provided unprecedented support to businesses throughout the pandemic to ensure these vital facilities remain for people to enjoy after the pandemic has come to an end. And this includes the £100 million National Leisure Recovery Fund and £270 million from Sport England.
Let's go to John Cryer. John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd first of all like to offer my commiseration and sympathy to our honourable friend on her recent tragic loss. We've seen over the past few months and years the behaviour of Prime Minister Modi of India becoming increasingly violent and aggressive towards the people he sees and his government sees as their opponents. We've still got 8 journalists held in prison on charges of sedition. A number of politicians too are being held, and 100 people are still missing after the farmers' protest. This comes on top of all the appalling behaviour by the government and the Indian Army in Kashmir. Now, we all know that talks are coming up between the Prime Minister and his opposite number. Could the Leader of the House confirm that the Prime Minister, as well as trade, will be raising human rights issues at that meeting and will then report back to the House of Commons?
Mr. Speaker, India is a most important ally for the United Kingdom. It is the largest democracy in the world. it has the rule of law in addition to being a democracy, and it is a nation with which we want to build and maintain the friendliest relationships in coming decades and indeed centuries. Of course, with all countries where we have close relationships and friendships, it is right to remind them of the high standards that are expected of nations of the standing of India, one of the most important nations in the world. And I'm sure my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, will always mention this when he is meeting foreign leaders.
Let's go to Fiona Bruce. Fiona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I add my condolences to the Honourable Member for North Tyneside, a dear friend from across the House. This week, my constituency celebrates the opening of Congleton Link Road. Would the leader join me in congratulating and thanking all who've worked on it, including community leaders, past and present councillors, council officers, contractors, and the business people who worked so hard to secure it? It will help reduce congestion, make getting to school safer, shorten commute times, improve air quality, and was facilitated, not least, by the investment of some £50 million from national government. Doesn't this demonstrate that this government is committed to delivering infrastructure improvements in the north for the real life, daily benefit of people who live here?
Leader.
Mr. Speaker, in the list of people who deserve thanks, my honourable friend forgot to include the most distinguished Member of Parliament who worked tirelessly to ensure that this link road was built and brought people together, campaigned with them and made sure that it happened. And she's looking slightly embarrassed as I say this, but I think she really does deserve a good deal of credit herself, and it does fit in with what the government is trying to do. We will spend over £600 billion of taxpayers' money over the next 5 years, and that will have £19 billion in transport next year alone, and this is part of the levelling up approach and building back better to make sure that the whole country benefits, but I'm delighted that Congleton is benefiting from a bypass.
Justin Battles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perfect Getaways is an independent travel agent that is based in my constituency, and it's a perfect example of how a small family-owned business can grow and be a success. But of course, the continuing uncertainty around international travel severely impacted their income, and whilst they're being able to access the Restarts grants for non-essential retail is welcome, the fact is at the moment more holidays are being cancelled than booked, which is causing them obviously real difficulty in far more than a lot of other non-essential retail outlets. So can we have a debate, please, on what more can be done to help those in the travel and tourism industry who really need some sector-specific support for a considerable period yet?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for raising the case of perfect getaways. It must be really difficult for people in the travel industry at the moment because there is still so much uncertainty. We don't know about the progression of the disease in other countries. We don't know clearly how safe it will be to travel. The red list is currently going up rather than down with the addition of India to the list coming later this week. So it is difficult for businesses in that category. The honourable gentleman is right to raise it. He may want an adjournment debate in the first instance, but I'm sure this will be a matter that the House returns to in the new session.
Elliot Colburn. Elliot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow, residents in Carshalton and Wallington and across England will celebrate St George's Day. And whilst many celebrations cannot take place this year due to COVID restrictions, could we have a debate to mark this day and celebrate all that is great about this green and pleasant land?
Leader.
Mr. Speaker, this week actually is a very interesting week for English saints because the 19th is St Alphege, who was murdered by the Danes for refusing to pay extra tax, a saint I've always particularly admired. The 21st, St Anselm, Archbishop of Canterbury, who had a great row with William Rufus over the powers of the church against the state. And then, of course, St George, who famously slew the dragon and did other great and noble things and became our patron saint really in the reign of Edward III and is the patron of the Order of the Garter as well, and a chivalrous saint, or very much thought to be. So I think celebrating and discussing the great history of our nation, the interesting agglomeration of saints who pray for us on a daily basis and pray for the success not just of England but of the whole of the United Kingdom, say St Andrew and St David and St Patrick, all the great saints should be celebrated and commemorated.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Today is Earth Day, so it seems an appropriate time to reflect on the environmental damage caused to marine habitats by the clearing of unexploded bombs and mines at sea, which is highly disruptive to marine mammals who rely on their auditory systems for navigation and communication, and indeed this threatens their very survival. Will the Leader of the House make a statement as to when the Government will progress regulations to favour the deflagration technique, which is several hundred times quieter than the current method of clearance of unexploded bombs and mines at sea?
Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady is right, obviously, to be concerned for marine mammals, for dolphins and whales and porpoises, who, when seen, give such pleasure to people and are an important part of the marine environment. I know there are campaigns in relation to how munitions that have been dumped at sea are best destroyed, and I will happily pass on her representations.
Let's go to Sarah Bretliff. Sarah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Fly tipping is a blight on all of our local towns and villages, from Haslingden to Belthorne and Great Harwood to Huncourt. Locally, we have some amazing community groups that are working to keep our streets clean, like the Baxenden Wombles, the Aussie Litter Pickers and Rosendale Civic Pride. Unfortunately, Mr Speaker, what we see by our Labour-run councils is that they clean up an area time and again at the expense of the taxpayer, but we fail to see a tough stance taken through fines and prosecutions. Can I ask the Leader of the House if we can have a debate in government time as to how we make sure our local councils take stronger action on the minority who ruin it for all residents, such as mine in Hyndburn and Haslingden?
Leader.
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend raises a similar point to my right honourable friend, the member for East Yorkshire. Local councils do have this responsibility, and the availability of tips provided by the council can be very important in deterring fly tipping. For if it is easy to dispose of waste, most people will do it, but if it is difficult and expensive, that may be a more complex issue and may lead to fly tipping. It is, as I say, a council responsibility, but fly tipping is wrong, it is illegal, and people should dispose of their waste properly and not put costs onto taxpayers by disposing it illegally, and the law should, of course, be enforced.
Order, order. I have a short statement to make about select committees. On the 24th of March, the House passed an order allowing for the virtual participation in select committee meetings and giving the chairs associated powers to make reports. Under the powers I was given under the order, I can now notify the House I am further extending the order until Monday, the 25th of June. Right, let us now make the necessary arrangements. I'm going to suspend the House for 3 minutes. Thank you. Sir, I now call the Secretary of State, Ben Wallace, to make a short statement. Secretary of State.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the Special Committee review into the historical actions of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission when it was the Imperial Commonwealth War Graves Commission and subsequently. May I start by placing on the record my thanks and gratitude to the committee who compiled this comprehensive report, in particular its chair, Sir Tim Hitchens, and contributing academics, Dr. George Hay, Dr. John Burke, and Professor Michelle Barrett. I'm also grateful to my right honourable friend, the member for Tottenham, who, alongside the makers of the Channel 4 documentary on this subject, provided the impetus for the establishment of the independent committee. Today, the committee's findings are published. They make for sober reading. The First World War was a horrendous loss of life. People of all class and race from all nations suffered a great tragedy, which we rightly remember every year on Remembrance Sunday. Just over 100 years ago, what emerged from that atrocity was a belief by the survivors that all those who lost their lives deserved to be commemorated. When the Imperial War Graves Commission was established, its founding principle was the equality of treatment in death, whatever an individual's rank in social or military life, whatever their religion, they would be commemorated identically. Unfortunately, the work of this report shows that they fell short in delivering on this principle. The IWGC relied on others to seek out the bodies of the dead, and where it could not find them, it worked with the officers of state to produce lists of those who did not return and remained unaccounted for. Given the pressures and confusions spun by such war, in many ways it is hardly surprising that mistakes were made at both stages. What is surprising and disappointing, however, is that a number of the mistakes, the number of casualties commemorated unequally, the number commemorated without names, and the number otherwise entirely unaccounted for, is not excusable. In some circumstances, there was little the IWGC could do. With neither bodies nor names, general memorials were the only way in which some groups might be commemorated at the time. Nonetheless, there are examples where the organisation also deliberately overlooked the evidence that might have allowed it to find those names. In others, Commission officials in the 1920s were happy to work with local administrations on projects across the Empire that ran contrary to the principles of equality in death. Elsewhere, it is clear that Commission officials pursued agendas and saw evidence or support locally to endorse 67 courses of action that jeopardised those same principles. In a small number of cases, too small, Mr. Speaker, where Commission officials had a greater say in the recovery and marking of graves, overarching imperial ideology connected to racial and religious differences were used to divide the dead and treat them unequally in ways that were impossible in Europe. The report concludes that post-World War I, in parts of Africa, the Middle East and India, the Commission often compromised its principles and failed to commemorate the war dead equally. Unlike their European counterparts, the graves of up to 54,000 mostly Indian, East African, West African, Egyptian and Somali casualties were not marked by individual headstones. Some were remembered through inscriptions on memorials. The names of others were only recorded in registers rather than memorials in stone. And a further 116,000 personnel, mostly East African and Egyptian, were not named or possibly not commemorated at all. There can be no doubt prejudice played a part in some of the Commission's decisions. In some cases, the IWGC assumed that communities of forgotten personnel would not recognise or value individual forms of commemoration. In other cases, they were simply not provided with the names or burial locations. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and the government both of the time and today, I want to apologise for the failures to live up to their founding principles all those years ago and express deep regret that it has taken so long to rectify the situation. Whilst we can't change the past, we can make amends and take action. And as part of this commission, the Commission has accepted all recommendations of the Special Committee. In the interest of time, I will group these in three themes, Mr. Speaker. First, the Commission will geographically and chronologically extend the search in the historical record for inequalities in commemoration and act on what is found. Second, the Commission will renew its commitment to equality in commemoration through the building of physical or digital commemorative structures. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the Commission will use its own online presence and wider education activities to reach out to all the communities of the former British Empire touched by the two world wars to make sure their hidden history is brought to life. Over the coming 6 months, the Commission will be assembling a global and diverse community of external experts who can help make this happen. There is also more the government specifically can do. The Ministry of Defence I lead will be determinedly proactive in standing for the values of equality, supporting diversity and investing in all our people. There is always more to be done, and that is why I welcome the Wigston review into inappropriate behaviours and recently took the rare decision to let service personnel give evidence as part of the inquiry into women in the armed forces led by my honourable friend, the member for Wrexham, through the Defence Select Committee. Furthermore, in order to honour the contribution to our armed forces, our friends from the Commonwealth and Nepal, myself and the Home Secretary will shortly be launching a public consultation to enable non-UK service personnel who choose to settle in the UK on proposals to remove their visa settlement fees. Mr. Speaker, the historic failings identified in this report must be acknowledged and acted upon, and they will be. But recognising the mistakes of the past should not diminish the Commonwealth War Graves Commission's groundbreaking achievements of today. The recommendations of the special committee should be welcomed by all of us. They are not just an opportunity for the Commission to complete its task and right historic wrongs, but they are also about pointing out the amazing thing that it is to serve our country and our allies. The amazing thing I know from being a soldier is the relationships that we forge together are forged on operations. True soldiers are agnostic of class, race and gender because the bond that holds us together is a bond forged in war. When on operations we share the risk, we share the sorrow and we rely on each other to get through sometimes the toughest times. The friendships I made in my service are still strong. Those common bonds were what lay behind the Imperial War Graves Commission's principles, and it is truly sad that on the occasions identified by the report, those principles were not followed. I feel it is my duty as a former soldier, Mr. Speaker, to do the right thing by those who gave their lives in the First World War across the Commonwealth and take what necessary steps we can to rectify the situation. The publication of this report is the beginning, not the end, and I look forward to working with my colleagues across the House to ensure that the CWGC receives the support and resources they need to take forward this important piece of work. Thank you.
Shadow Secretary of State John Healey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for his statement and for the advance copy. I thank the Commission for their advance briefing, which I know a number of honourable members had received before today. Above all, can I thank the Secretary of State for his apology, both on behalf of the government of the time and of the Commission. This is an important moment for the Commission and for the country in coming to terms with past injustices and dedicating ourselves to future action. And none of this would have happened without my right honourable friend, the member for Tottenham. His documentary, The Unremembered, laid bare the early history of the Imperial War Graves Commission and exposed the Commission had failed to live up to its founding aim of equality of treatment for all war dead. And can I also pay tribute to Channel 4 and to David Olusoga for producing that documentary, and to Professor Michelle Barrett, whose research underpinned that work. Mr. Speaker, perhaps in another era we'd have been tempted to leave that there, but rightly the Commission did not, and indeed my right honourable friend would not have let them leave it there. This report is a credit to the Commission of today, but its content is a great discredit to the Commission and to the Britain of a century ago. An estimated 45,000 to 54,000 casualties, predominantly Indian, East African, West African, Egyptian and Somali personnel were commemorated unequally. A further 116,000 casualties, potentially as many as 350,000, were not commemorated by name or not commemorated at all. In the words of the special committee who produced this report, the Commission failed to do what it was set up to do. The IWGC was responsible for or complicit in decisions outside Europe that compromised its principles and treated war dead differently and often unequally. This history needs to be corrected and shared, and the unfinished work of the 1920s needs to be put right where possible. Mr. Speaker, this has been part of Britain's blind spot to our colonial past, and we've been too slow as a country since then to recognise and honour fully the regiments and the troops drawn from Africa and Asia and the Caribbean. Today is a reminder of the great contribution and sacrifice that so many from these countries have made to forging modern multicultural Britain. What matters now is what happens next. The follow-up to the report's recommendations cannot be part of business as before for the Commission. What role will the Secretary of State play as Chair of the Commission? Is he satisfied the Commission has sufficient resources to do this additional work? And if not, will he make more available? What role will Britain's embassy staff, including our defence attachés, play in communicating this public apology, in researching new names and in telling the wider story of the sacrifice communities in these countries made during World War I? When can we expect the completion of the investigation into the way the Commission commemorated the dead from these countries during the Second World War? And what commitment will he make today to report to Parliament on the Commission's progress along those goals? And additionally, Mr. Speaker, we welcome the Secretary of State's pre-announcement of the consultation on a scheme to end the injustice of Commonwealth and Nepalese soldiers paying twice for their British citizenship. It's something we've campaigned for, the British Legion has campaigned for, and particularly my honourable friend, the member for Barnsley Central, who's not on the call list today, has led and championed that cause. Can the Secretary of State say exactly when the consultation will be launched? Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, no apology can atone for the injustice, the indignity, the suffering set out in this report. The Secretary of State spoke today as a soldier. There was a soldier, the Honourable Member for Middlesbrough West, more than 100 years ago in this chamber, speaking about the Commission, said, "We served in common cause. We suffered equal hardships. We took equal risks, and we desired that if we fell, we should be buried together under one general system and in one comradeship of death." Today, Mr. Speaker, belatedly, we aim to commemorate in full the sacrifice of many thousands who died for our country in the First World War and who have not yet been fully honoured. We will remember them.
Speaker, can I thank my right honourable colleague opposite for both the sort of tone and the support, I think, for the whole House's efforts, and obviously the right honourable member for Tottenham's almost single-handed drive to get it higher up, even though, as I think he rightly credits himself, some of the academics and the programme makers made a step change in that. And I want to repeat, Mr. Speaker, my regret that it has taken so long. None of us were here in the 1920s, but many of us were here for the last 30, 40, 50 years, and I think it is a deep point of regret for me that in my own education, what I was taught of the First World War predominantly boiled down to the Somme and poets, but very little about the contribution from the Commonwealth countries and the wider, at the time, British Empire. And I think as I go around the world as Defence Secretary, it is remarkable to be reminded of those contributions. In some parts of the world there are graves and places to commemorate. I went to my own father's base where he fought during the Malaya emergency, now Malaysia, to see the Gurkha cemetery, where men were dying both to defeat communism, to protect Malaysia, but also on behalf of what was then Britain then, right up into the early 70s. I think it is important to remember that we have excluded a lot of that from our children's education, and I think we have to absolutely rectify that. To the right honourable member's points on regular updates, I'm absolutely happy to come to the House either in written form in the library or indeed on occasion to make a statement on the update of the progress. As the report itself says, some of these are quickly delivered recommendations, and some will take time. And I think the investigation, for example, into the Second World War commemoration and anything else is ongoing. And I will make sure the Commission not only knows that it has my support, but we will hold them to account in delivering that. And I will seek regular quarterly updates from the Commission of the progress they make, and in turn update the House. How we will communicate and make sure we work with the Commonwealth countries, because this is not just about an audience here, it is about all those people in those countries. And only recently I was talking both to my Kenyan counterpart and visited Kenya again, and indeed visited Somalia, and it's important that the people there both understand the sacrifice of their fellow citizens, but also that we explain and hold them, honour them as well. And as we speak, our Defence Attaché network and other ambassadors and officials around the world are communicating these reports to host countries. Some of them we have been earlier engaged. In countries such as Kenya, for example, we have already been working on memorials and things we can do together in making sure they understand the content of this report, and we will continue to use that network going forward. As for funding and what future steps, I'm absolutely open to all suggestions of more that we can do for education, more we can do for commemoration. And the Commission itself at the moment says it is satisfied that it has the budget, but I don't rule out looking at more funding for it if that is required. Its current income is 52 million, contributed by a range of Commonwealth countries who contribute to the funding, but there is nothing to rule out. I'm not ruling it out. I would be very open to sensible suggestions that make that difference. And I think, just as I've said again, I will continue to update the House and make sure that we hold both the Commission to account, and the House can hold me to account in my position as chair of that Commission. And I think we should take this as the start point, Mr. Speaker, not the end.
Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 15th of June 1955, a small force commanded by RF regiment officers, including my father, crawled into the Wadi Hatib in Aden Protectorate. They were ambushed. The commanding officer was killed, another British officer was killed, and 6 Arab soldiers were killed. My father took over command. The 6 Arab soldiers are unknown, except, of course, the Arab officer. He got a posthumous military cross, as did the commanding officer, posthumous military cross, as did my father. But the other 5 Arab soldiers, there is no record of these men who gave their lives for this country. So I entirely endorse the recommendations and the conclusions of the CGWC report. My question, though, is this. Mindful of the fact that we don't pay any attention to graves from the Boer War, or wars before 1900, and they're just left to go to rack and ruin. How long, Secretary of State, will we be able to sustain the brilliant effort that actually the Commission carries out now in maintaining graves from the Second World War and onwards?
Secretary of State.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. I mean, first of all, him and I share the same thing, and some of the sadness and anger I feel from this report is driven out of being a soldier. He and I will know what it is like to be in our operations, and it is a great leveller. One of the strengths of military service is actually it is a great leveller. You realise people you thought weren't brave turn out to be brave, people you thought were brave turn out not to be so. You realise that there are different skills that help you get through things, and it is never linked to your class or your colour or whatever. It is linked to all the other qualities that people have. And first and foremost, it surprises you. And so it angers me here that brothers in arms in those days, predominantly the brethren, were forgotten for whatever reasons, and that mustn't happen again. Look, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, as it is today, does do an amazing job. And for any of colleagues in this House, Mr. Speaker, who have attended numerous graveyards around the world or sites around the world, you'll see the effort that has gone to, sometimes in quite hostile countries. I don't think there is any ambition to draw that down. In fact, there's an ambition to I think in today's world we're more and more off the view that commemoration is very important for learning to avoid problems of the future. So I think it will go on. We will continue to fund it, continue to support it. And I know honourable members across the House who sit on it, sometimes its governing bodies, etc., will continue to do a first-class job.
Let's go to SNP spokesperson Martin Doherty-Hughes. Martin.
With your indulgence, Mr Speaker, may I congratulate the former MP for West Dunbartonshire, John McFall, a son of the Rock of Dumbarton, on his elevation as Speaker of the other place. And while he knows I'm opposed to an unelected chamber, I know that he is a dedicated public servant and I count him as a very good friend. Let me thank the Honourable Member, first of all, of Tottenham for all the work that they have done, but also the Secretary of State for his words, which I'm sure will start the process of healing for the descendants of those who have given so much for a state that did not seem to value that sacrifice at the time. And as the grandnephew of James Timlin of County Mayo, whose name is found on the War Memorial of Tynecott, having fallen on the 29th of December 1918, let me also acknowledge the work of the War Graves Commission. That said, there is obviously something of a grim irony in this report, coming so close to one on racism, which we heard about just the other week. And so it makes me wonder, Mr Speaker, about what the Secretary of State just said. I do not believe for a moment that he does not believe that there has been a great wrong committed here. I just wonder if he can somehow address the distinct cognitive dissonance everyone on the opposition side is feeling when they hear it said. Because there's another truth that's revealed in a report such as this one. While we have become used to the Windrush post-war framing of immigration and diversity on these islands, is it not the case that people of many cultures have fought for, if not enjoyed the benefit of, our freedoms for an awful lot longer than that? And as we think of the hundreds and thousands of Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, animists, and those of no religion who have not been commemorated because they did not fit the white ideal of what is supposed to fit into a uniform, I think it's important for those of all faiths and none to be assured that they are valued not only in our armed forces, but in the police, in the NHS, or wherever they serve. The Secretary of State can be assured of the support from all on my benches, should he wish to do that.
Secretary of State.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member and for his comments, and indeed his comments about the former member, I think, of Dumbarton's elevation. Any of us who knew him in this House will be pleased for him to do that. But I hear what he says, and I think I can really refer him to the points I make earlier, which is what conforms to uniform, what conforms to what makes a good soldier is actually all those qualities I talked about earlier. It's not about colour, it's not about religion, it's not about many of those other things that are used or have been used to discriminate in the past. And I think I just hope that this report absolutely is a catalyst to remind people that many people gave their lives for this country and for supposedly for those values that should have been agnostic to who they were and where they came from. And if we're going to honour them through this report, we're going to honour them by putting it right, and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. And then as in the present, as Defence Secretary, I have to do much more to make sure we recruit more people from backgrounds that are viewed not as the white background that you talk about, but from all parts of our culture in society, because that actually adds to the capability of our armed forces, doesn't detract, and we are sorely missing the right numbers of people to continue to make our armed forces the best in the world.
Mr Speaker, I welcome the statement today, and I publicly thank the Commission for its excellent work over many years. Having also visited several sites, could I please ask the Minister what challenges he sees with regards to those sites located further afield? So, for example, my sense is that the sites in Western Europe and the UK, the Falklands, are easily maintained and will be so for the future. But are there particular difficulties, perhaps, that may lie ahead for those sites that are located in Africa, across the Far East, and in further aflung places?
My honourable friend raises one of the key challenges of maintaining sites, sometimes in places that have been quite hostile. I think one of the strengths of how the modern day War Graves Commission does its job is by using local staff, by engaging locally, and indeed by being supported by both the department and the Defence Diplomatic Network to make sure that we work with host governments as well. I'm in a sense more optimistic because I think this report will help open further the door for commemorating and finding and indeed maintaining some of those sites, because, you know, if we come along and say to the host countries, you know, hands up, this is what we could have done better, this is what we didn't do right, we have a far greater chance of being collectively able to commemorate those people and making sure that we educate both their populations and our populations here about the contribution that was made.
David.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is most definitely a watershed moment in the life of this country. And can I put on record my thanks to Professor Michelle Barrett, to David Olusoga, and to Channel 4 for their work in this documentary. Can I associate myself with the remarks of my right honourable friend, the member for Wentworth and Dunn, and can I thank the Secretary of State for his words in the Chamber today. All of us in the Chamber, and it is still the case in this country, when we think of the First World War, we think of the Western Front, and we think of the poems of Wilfred Owen and the Battle of Somme. We do not think of where the first bullets were fired in the First World War, which were in fact in the East African campaign in Africa. And so on this sombre day, but important day, I'm thinking of the King's African Riflemen and the many, many thousands of men who were dragged from their villages to be in the carrier corps on behalf of the then British Empire. There is no higher service than to die for your country in war. And it is the case that every single culture on the planet honours those who die in those circumstances. It is a great travesty and a stain and a shame that this country failed to do that for black and brown people across Africa, India, and the Middle East. But we have come to this moment 100 years on. It's a very, very important moment, and I thank the Secretary of State for his leadership and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission for the work that they have done to get us to this point. Can I just ask the Secretary of State, because I do think further resources will be necessary, particularly in those countries, to commemorate in the appropriate way, and the necessary resources to revisit the archives in those countries, to find names where there are names, but to appropriately commemorate where those names do not exist. We use the word whitewash for a reason. Let there be no more whitewashing. The unremembered will be remembered, and future generations of young people in our own country and the Commonwealth will understand their sacrifice.
Secretary of State.
Thank you. And the Right Honourable Gentleman, last point is will, should, must understand their sacrifice, I think is really important. And exactly as he said, the East Africa campaign, the early salvos of the First World War. And was I taught that at school? No. How many in this House probably were? Almost none at all. And I think I have already worked closely with my Kenyan counterpart, and I will continue to do so, and I regularly speak to her about that. I think, as the report says itself, it indicates towards things like bursaries and education and indeed working with the archives. And both the Commission and others will have the support of the Department in being able to do that and follow through on the report. And at the same time, on funding, if funding is required, I'm absolutely supportive of accessing that funding to help deliver what is required in those countries and indeed at here. And they will have the full weight of our Defence Diplomatic Network to make sure that we can be seen to support and actually support delivering on those issues. And I think just if I may, Mr. Speaker, the actions by the Right Honourable Gentleman on this are something to be commended. It's not just a passing thing. It is a real thing that he has achieved that starts a process for many, many decades. It will probably affect my grandchildren's education, and not many people can say in this House that they make a real long-lasting difference. And I will be taking that report when I go back to Kenya and to other parts of the Commonwealth, and I shall reflect on it and seek, when I have a visit, that we find a place to commemorate together with my counterpart and lay a wreath on behalf of all those people.
Joy Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I thank the member for Tottenham for raising this important issue and for campaigning so tirelessly to acknowledge the death of all soldiers that fought in the Great War. And may I thank the Secretary of State for bringing this statement to the House today and for the humility and the acknowledgement of your work as a soldier that has made the realization that death is the great equalizer for us all. And thank you for remembering every soldier across the Commonwealth that gave their life during World War I. And will my right honourable friend join me now in paying tribute to those serving in our armed forces currently who are bravely serving across the world, and just to acknowledge their sacrifice and to thank them for the work that they do.
State. Yes, I mean, one of the best ways to honour the people in this report is to support as much as we can the people serving today and our veterans. And I would like to place on record, Madam Deputy Speaker, my sadness for losing my colleague yesterday, the former Veterans Minister, who did contribute to supporting and making government policy better for our veterans, supported by the wider government, and he will be a sad loss, but I know he will continue to campaign for them, and I no doubt will hear him from the backbenches on that issue. But that's why we have set about, both in the command paper, a whole chapter on our people. It's why we are funding things like wraparound childcare for serving personnel. It's never been done before, to make sure that we demonstrate with action and funding that support.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have the honour of representing this place as a Commonwealth War Graves Commissioner, along with the Right Honourable Member for Ludlow. And I want to thank the Defence Secretary, as the Chair of the Commission, for what he has said today, and commend the report of the Special Committee, made up of external experts, for their diligent and extensive work. As set out in the Kenyan report over 100 years ago, it said, "It was ordained that what was done for one was done for all, and that all, whatever their military rank or position in civic life, should have equal treatment in their graves." I cannot stress enough just how seriously all commissioners take this matter, and how committed we all are to ensuring that we right the historic wrongs of the past, ensuring that we correct errors and omissions. And the service of all to our country matters. We will remember them, and remember them all. And I want to pay tribute to my Right Honourable friend for Tottenham and Professor Michelle Barrett for their important work on this issue. They provided the vital catalyst for the Commission setting up the Special Committee. And alongside the full and unconditional apology for the wrongs of the past, the Commission have already agreed a detailed action plan to address all the Special Committee's recommendations. And I'm sure that we all want these to be implemented in a timely way. So could I just ask the Defence Secretary, if needed, will there be additional resources so we can complete this work as quickly as possible?
Chief State.
Well, I'm grateful for the Honourable Member for Kingston upon Hull North comments. Yes, I mean, the answer is yes. I will ask in return that she, in her role as a Commissioner alongside, make sure that what requests are match the aspirations and the recommendations in that report. And I think that is something. And I will be delighted to continue to work with her and the other Commissioners on that. And I would also place on record that the Commissioners did an excellent job alongside the independent experts. And when we met on this a few weeks ago, I think they made it very clear to me their determination, the Commissioners, to carry out the recommendations and to put right the issues identified in the report.
We now go to Philip Dunn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm pleased to be able to follow my the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Kingston-upon-Hull North, who I share membership of the Commission with today. And I am proud to be a Commissioner, and I am grateful to the Chairman of the Commission for his important statement today. I'm also proud of the 1,200 people who today work in 150 countries around the world, tending the memorials, commemorations and gravestones of the many who served and lost their lives for the protection of this country and our values. Over 100 years ago, the War Graves Commission was established with a specific remit to commemorate the First World War dead of the then British Empire, and to do so defined by the principle of equality of treatment in death, whatever their rank, religion or race. This happened in Europe, and I'm not proud today that this did not happen across Africa, the Middle East and India. So I'd like to join my Right Honourable friend and the Right Honourable Lady in welcoming the report that we commissioned in December 2019, a month following the Channel 4 programme presented by the Right Honourable Member for Tottenham, featuring the work of Professor Michelle Barrett, which acted as a catalyst for this report based on detailed research through available archives. And I can confirm that this issue has been and is being taken extremely seriously within the Commission. And we are committed to ensuring that we right the historic wrongs of the past. The Commission has been working over the last 20 years to ensure that we correct errors or omissions as we find them. And that's what we will do on the back of this report. My Right Honourable friend has confirmed that he will hold the Commission to account in delivering the detailed action plan, which it has agreed to address the recommendations made by the Special Committee. But will he agree with me that while we cannot right the wrongs of 100 years ago, the Commission can and should recognise that mistakes were made, apologise for them as he has just done, and commit to do what we can, where we can, now, to renew our commitment to equality and commemoration with all communities of the former British Empire touched by both world wars, where this report reveals that that did not take place.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend is, first of all, right to point out the determination of the existing Commission and over the last 20 years to correct things as they find them. And I think this is one of those times where they have exposed things going way back. But he is also absolutely right that when you go around the world, that network of people do an amazing job. It is extraordinary where you find, almost like an oasis, well-kept areas of commemoration in parts of the world that you were often surprised we were even there in the first place, but also a surprise that even now they are kept and looked after. And those volunteers, some of them, and also some of the paid employers do an extremely good job as well. I think in answer to the funding, as I've said to his honourable friend from Hull, that I absolutely stand by to make sure we find the available funding to deliver that. I ask in the return the same of you, which is to make sure that these things are properly dealt with and looked at and examined, and they fit in accordance with the report's recommendations and further subsequent recommendations as well.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The revelations set out in this report are unacceptable, and it is important that service and sacrifice is properly commemorated for all. Today, a Commonwealth service leaver with a partner and 2 children will have to pay almost £10,000 to continue to live in the UK, despite those years of service and sacrifice. So will the Government commit to waiving application fees for indefinite leave for all those members of the armed forces on discharge and their families, and demonstrate that they really are looking at tackling inequalities?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and it prompts me to answer the last question of my right honourable colleague opposite. We will start the consultation on that at the beginning of May.
David Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This report's findings make for very uncomfortable reading, but I pay tribute to the committee, today's Commission for its response, and to the Right Honourable Member for Tottenham and all those he worked with on drawing a vital spotlight to this issue. It will sadly be impossible in too many cases, but does my Right Honourable friend agree that where the Commission can identify descendants of those who were named, that it tries to work with them on appropriately commemorating those who gave their lives in the service of this country? Because it can't undo what happened then, but it might provide some small comfort today.
Secretary of State.
Absolutely, and the report commits to try and seek further detail of both through archives and others about trying to identify those individuals and therefore make sure we try and find a way to commemorate. The plus side in this day and age is the internet and the ability to communicate. I've already had an email in my inbox this morning from a man in Kenya about his grandfather, and I read it with sadness and interest, and it gives people that opportunity to connect up. And hopefully this report will be a catalyst for many of those things, and we'll be able to follow them up. I'll make sure that I pass on the email to the appropriate authorities, but also I think it gives me somebody to visit when I go back next to Kenya.
Kevin Jones.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can I first of all declare an interest as a former Commissioner of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and a current trustee of the Commonwealth War Graves Foundation? Can I pay tribute to my right honourable friend, the member for Tottenham, for his work in this issue? And can I commend the Secretary of State for his statement today? I'd also like to pay tribute to the present commissioners who have commissioned this report, a not an easy task for them to do. And reading the report is not easy. The Commission, quite rightly, in Europe commemorates all those, including from India and across the Commonwealth, who died in the First World War, whether it be the Indian Memorial at Neuve-Chapelle or the Brighton Memorial to Sikhs or the Southampton Memorial, which has Lord Kitchener's name alongside the African Labour Corps that died in the First World War. But that doesn't get away from the fact that attitudes were taken, racist attitudes were taken to treat others in other parts of the world differently. Can I ask the Secretary of State on Education, he knows that the Commonwealth War Graves Foundation is currently working with the MOD to promote education amongst young people around broad issues of the Commonwealth War Graves Foundation. I wonder whether he could act as a catalyst to draw other government departments to work that we can do not just in this country but internationally to ensure that this story is told and that future generations, I think his aspiration is, recognise the debt we have to these individuals.
Secretary of State.
My right honourable friend and my right honourable member, absolutely right. And the last point, his point on education, I think is true. I think one of the answers to the questions of why has it taken so long is, I think if people had been educated about what we did, the next question would have been, so how do I commemorate it? And because it wasn't educated, no one asked the question, no one created the pressure to find out. I think that's started now, and I'll be delighted to speak to my colleague in the Department of Education, Ministry of Education, see what they can do in the curriculum and indeed teaching that, but also make sure, as I think the Commission's report itself talks about, education in those countries as well, to make sure that people have access to the history and we can then incorporate it into our future teaching.
We now go to Marco Longhi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Defence Secretary for this very important and much needed statement? Can I ask him, though, does he agree with me that the contribution made by soldiers from Commonwealth countries to our current armed forces is still extremely valuable today?
Secretary of State.
It's absolutely not only valuable, it makes us who we are, and we should continue to do more and more. We recruited over 1,000 from the Commonwealth this year alone, and we should always recognise that our strength is our diversity and our global connections. And I think people from all backgrounds bring real strengths to us, and we will continue to do what we can to support. We'll have our consultation. Since I have been Defence Secretary, myself and the Home Secretary has moved lots of policy issues that weren't progressing around interpreters, for example, in Afghanistan, that sent messages about how Britain values people, that supports it from other parts of the world, and we'll continue to do that.
Stephen Bonnar.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Underpinning all of the past commemorations decisions were the entrenched prejudices and rampant racism of imperial attitudes. We know the empire is over, but these attitudes linger on, and if they do not, why then does the UK government's report into racism, which the UAN has already stated is reprehensible and normalises white supremacy, push back against calls to decolonise the curriculum? a landmark decision that has already been taken in my own constituency with my own local authority of North Lanarkshire Council. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that we should lead the way in anti-racist education, as the SNP have pledged to do in the upcoming manifesto?
Secretary of State.
Well, I think every political party would support equality teaching in schools and not teaching racism. I'm happy to explore further his comments about anti-colonial, decolonising our education process, curriculum. My grandfather was a Scot who went to India. An awful lot of my Scottish family were served abroad in the Empire. That was a lot of how many Scots themselves found success or education by going afield. So I think it's important to educate people about the role we all played in the Empire, whether the good and the bad, but also we should also recognise all those people that were part of it and the sacrifices that were made and the treatment that they received, good and bad, and I think that is really important.
We now go to Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This report does make for uncomfortable reading and lessons have to be learnt, and I thank the Right Honourable Member for Tottenham for being a leading light in this important matter. And I too add my comments and thoughts with other members from across the House regarding the need to ensure education is put at the forefront and that the history curriculum really does reflect the massive contribution made by our Commonwealth Armed Forces. We also know that war memorials and war graves, sadly, are desecrated, and I saw that recently in Tunstall Memorial Gardens. But thanks to Macy and Isabel, aged 10 and 5, who were inspired by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, they went down and cleaned it up. So would my right honourable friend join me in praising Macy and Isabel and celebrate the Commonwealth War Graves Commission's work in maintaining the upkeep of 23,000 cemeteries across the world?
State.
Yes, I fully support my honourable friend. It's there is an amazing amount of work that is done across the world and at home in some of the smallest graveyards as well, not just big ones that we often see on the telly. They are looked after immaculately. They are also a place for many people of sanctuary themselves. And I think when we connect young people with those places, it also is a great vehicle to remind what sacrifice is and actually the horrors of war and why it should always be in our interest to try and avoid it.
We now go to Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I thank the Secretary of State for his comments today and the tenor in which he's made them. I'm pleased that the Commission has fully accepted the Special Committee's recommendations. And I say, if I'm able to visit my great-grandfather's headstone in one of the First World War cemeteries in France, the great-grandchildren from our West African, East African, Somali, Egyptian, Indian diaspora, amongst others, should equally have fitting memorials to honour all their ancestors. We must ensure deeds, not just words, to rectify this historic racism and prejudice and to secure justice. So can I ask the Secretary of State whether he will commit to ensure to take steps that any additional funding made available to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission to implement these important recommendations is protected and ring-fenced for this specific and important work?
Secretary of State.
Well, I think I would go as far as saying I can agree to make funding available, and I will rely on the commissioners, both the obviously Right Honourable Member for Ludlow, the Honourable Member for Kingston upon Hull, and all the other and all the other members who are on that commission to be the guardian of implementing this report and its next steps. And what I don't want is people to come to this House and say that the money was a barrier to something, but I also want to make sure that we do it in an appropriate way that has a lasting impact, that makes sure that, as I said, the start of the process doesn't end. It goes on and on and on until we have commemorated the past, but also value people in the future.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sure the whole House would wish to honour the heroism and sacrifice of all troops who fought for this country, whether they be from the UK or the wider Commonwealth. The report certainly makes for sombre reading, and I'm pleased that my right honourable friend will take forward the recommendations cited within it. However, would he agree with me that it would be entirely wrong to let the brave African and Asian service personnel of the last century be dragged into the divisive culture wars of the present day?
Secretary.
The only wars I'm interested in are the ones that we can finish, avoid, or that threaten our values, and that's what the people we will need to do that, the people we will need to protect us. I don't care where they come from, I don't care what their orientation is, I don't care what colour they are either.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The failure to formally honour and remember Black and Asian service personnel in the same way as white troops is indeed a cause for shame and deep sadness. And I'm pleased that the Minister has indicated that all support necessary to try and do what we can to right this wrong will be made available. But can he confirm that this support is progressed with the utmost urgency and sensitivity so that finally all our war dead are given the respect they deserve? He will understand, I am sure, that any delays will only entrench the sense of hurt and disrespect that this report will inevitably provoke.
Secretary of State.
Yes, and look, please be under no illusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Commission is absolutely determined to see this through. Your own members are on the Commission, are members of this House, and they are determined, and we will continue to both talk together, work together, and the weight of the department will be behind them in achieving their goals.
Charlotte Nichols.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I join members across the House in paying tribute to the tireless campaigning work of my right honourable friend, the member for Tottenham, in bringing us to this important watershed moment in our nation's history. I welcome the Special Committee's report, which makes for sobering reading in laying bare the historic injustice that meant that tens of thousands of Commonwealth military personnel who made the ultimate sacrifice, giving their lives for this country in World War I, have been commemorated unequally or not at all. In seeking to right this historic wrong, the committee's report recommends an ongoing commitment to continue the search for the unnamed war dead and those potentially not commemorated. So can the Secretary of State please outline what resources will be made available to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission to make that a reality, to ensure both that all our gracious war dead are commemorated equally and that future generations are able to remember them?
Secretary of State.
At present, the Commission says that it is currently satisfied that its £52 million budget is enough to start that process. However, we will complement that with the time and dedication of our defence diplomatic network, over 100 military defence attaches around, and indeed supporting staff in the embassies. So their actual presence in country will be there, working alongside. And as I've said earlier, I'll be happy to review any requests coming forward for funding for other parts of the report or subsequent investigations.
The final question is from Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A visit to a Commonwealth War Graves cemetery can be very emotional. Lines of tombstones confront you with those fallen, all honoured in the same way. The commemorative equality given to matters of rank and class is remarkable, and I must congratulate the Commission on that. But when it comes to race, the Commission have disastrously failed to live up to these principles. The Secretary of State has united the House in the way he has presented his statement today. But can he expand on how the Ministry of Defence will support the Commission by way of funding and guidance in implementing the recommendations made in this report, and how this can be made a continuous process?
Secretary of State.
Madam Speaker, I'd just first of all like to place a record that this Commission and some of the previous Commissions have actually taken some really strong steps in fixing what was wrong when it was identified. The area of regret is that we didn't do a lot of this much earlier. And I also would like to just say, Madam Deputy Speaker, we shouldn't forget, whatever the circumstances were, many of these people gave their lives to defeat fascism, to defeat people that challenged our freedoms, both for themselves and for us. And that was a sacrifice for many that was, in my view, worth it insofar as the freedoms that we enjoy. And I think that is really, really important not to forget in this report, that it wasn't for nothing. These people didn't give up their lives, whatever the circumstances were, for nothing. Certainly in the wars of the Second World War and others, the real threat to our freedoms was real. But I will continue, as I've said in earlier answers, to make sure that the Commission is supported by the Department. I, as Chair, as well as Defence Secretary, and as the members on that Commission, to continue to work to always make sure that we commemorate our dead, commemorate people who made sacrifices, whether it was in the First World War, Second World War, all the other conflicts. We owe it to them. How we do it is changing sometimes. To visit the National Arboretum is also a sobering and very emotive place. To see each individual, often units or indeed regiments, or indeed conflicts celebrated slightly differently or commemorated is also very moving. And I think that is a good way and a future way to look at how we can unite people around our Commonwealth.
I thank the Secretary of State for his statement, and we now... Were you raising a point of order? Point of order. Point of order.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to be able to raise this point of order in relation to the operating of the quarantine exemptions process. An effective quarantine system is vital for protecting our borders, but there has to be some consideration and compassion for those who are vulnerable, who have disabilities or complex health conditions and medical evidence to prove it. There's been little opportunity to debate these exemptions, and this week guidance appeared on the Department for Health website, but the Commons Library confirmed there's been no written or verbal statement regarding this, which we need to support our constituents' cases. Madam Deputy Speaker, despite representation and medical evidence, one of my constituents with complex health conditions, forced to quarantine alone, ended up being rushed to hospital over Easter, and doctors there again said she shouldn't have been in the hotel at all. I now have a 16-year-old constituent, Ms Malik, who went urgently to visit her ill father in Dubai whilst her mother was at home with her sisters. She's now been stuck in Dubai for weeks, terrified to return. She's a minor, it's not safe for her to quarantine in a hotel on her own, nor would she be allowed to by law. Her father's in Dubai, her mother has 2 other children to look after, there's no one who can quarantine with her. She has a history of self-harming and her GP has asked that she be allowed to self-isolate at home with protections. She's due to come back on Saturday. We have had first a rejection and since then nothing but delays and lack of compassion and support from the Department for Health. So could I ask your advice, Madam Deputy Speaker, on what is the process the government is following? How experienced are those staff making those decisions? And I would be grateful to put this on record and seek advice so that we can scrutinise the government on what's going on, including those who are fasting due to Ramadan, not getting food at the right times, so that there can be some accountability and support for our constituents.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her courtesy in giving notice of her point of order. She's raised a number of issues about details that I am not in a position to answer, but I think she is an experienced member of the House and knows the various ways in which she can question ministers. If there's any doubt about that, she can consult the table office. But what she has done today, obviously, is to make her concerns known about the very important matters and cases. She's brought that to the attention of the House. She's put it on the record, and with regard to further information or statements that may be made, I'm sure the Treasury bench will have heard her views that she would like that to happen. Thank you. We now come to the Select Committee statement. James Sunderland will speak for up to 10 minutes, during which no interventions may be taken. At the conclusion of his statement, I will call members to put questions on the subject of the statement and will call James Sunderland to respond to these in turn. I call the Chair of the Committee on the Armed Forces Bill, James Sunderland.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.